name's Garrett Ney. I work for a company called Infusionsoft in Lehigh. By the way, we are hiring right now. We're looking for people, so if you're interested, come talk to me afterwards or talk to Brent over here. We're both representing. So yeah, this is build your app the way you want with Ampersand.js. And first, you might have noticed I had in the title on the talk on the schedule, I had in there, forget frameworks. And that's how I submitted it. And as I was thinking about it, I thought maybe that was a little inflammatory, and I apologize. But what I was trying to convey was sort of this realization I had as I was learning more about Ampersand. And I want to tell you a little bit about that. So about a year ago, I was working on some projects that use Backbone. Have any of you ever used Backbone? Well, not really. Well, so Backbone's fun. It has its limitations. And I was kind of thinking about some other projects I was going to do, and I was looking at ways to extend Backbone and fill in some gaps that it had. And I found out about this project called Ampersand, which basically, and we'll get a little bit to this later, is sort of like Backbone 2.0. And I was really excited. Thought, great, I found it, and this is just what I want. And I even gave an early version of this presentation at a user group a little while ago. It was basically a sales pitch for this new framework. Even though on the website of Ampersand it says this is a non-frameworky framework, I don't even think it's a framework now. So I realized that, well, let me tell you what happened. I was watching a video, and this is Henrik Garrett. He's one of the lead developers on Ampersand at a company called And Yet in Washington, I think, giving this keynote address at Backbone Conf last December. So I'm going to play a little clip for you, and I didn't get a chance to test the sound, but hopefully it'll work. Yeah. Is there a way I can pipe the sound through? Sorry, I forgot to test this.
I had struggled to do so until last night, by a stroke of good luck, I stumbled across.
Can you hear that? Okay.
And
okay. We'll just go with that.
Okay.
I'm just going to skip to what he says at the very end of the talk.
Boaz and Sam having a good time, sharing pasta.
Okay.
Anyway, I think the thing that I want to leave you guys with is just that, I think we should really, instead of just kind of jumping into, hopping onto the next bandwagon that comes along and the coolest, newest thing that's out there, I think it's important that we kind of remember that at one point, everything was the hot new thing. And, I think we should really work on building, much more flexible, much more decoupled, much more modular approaches. Because arguably that's what made Backbone successful to begin with. Being able to use it in lots of different ways for lots of different things. And I want to see that work continue, not just the, hey, let's build a whole new framework that does all this new stuff. Right? So, that's kind of my call to action for you guys. Let's push these things a little bit and not just assume that someone else is going to solve these problems for us.
So hopefully you could hear some of that. Basically what he's saying is, our point here isn't to create the next hot new framework. It's mostly to establish a way of creating a modular approach where you can pick pieces as you need it, and instead of just kind of going all in with the hot new thing. And he talks more about that throughout his talk, where they had Backbone, but they started breaking it up into pieces, and then when they wanted to add new functionality, they just wrote a new module for it. So instead of having to update the entire framework, they're just adding new pieces, and then the user can use those as they want to, or just forget about them if they don't want them. And he had some interesting tweets I found just recently that I wanted to share. I've seen Ampersand.js used with React, Riot, Reactive, Handlebars, Jade, Dust, VDOM, Mustache, HTML strings. Flexibility is a real thing. Flexible architectures let you remodel the kitchen without burning down the whole house. In my case, it would probably be more effective to burn down the whole house if I was actually remodeling a kitchen, because it would be a disaster, I'm sure. Also, we see things like state, router, and events used without any other ampersand modules. I support this. He champions this concept, and so does the team. They're not aiming to be a framework, basically, is what I'm saying, and that's one of the main concepts I want to get across, that this isn't trying to be a sales pitch for ampersands per se. It's more this concept of building your code, structuring your app in a way where you can have your parts be the components, and I use that term loosely, be interchangeable, and you can use pieces from ampersand or from wherever as you need it. So a little bit about how ampersand is. And this is something I like to include on my talks. I don't know if any of you ever read this blog post. It's from a few years ago. Give it 5 minutes. Basically, the concept is some of these things you might disagree with. You might be resistant to it. Heck, I'm resistant to some of them. I disagree with some of them. It's cool. The point is, give it 5 minutes. In this case, give it 45 minutes. Don't reject it right out. Just, give it a chance to think about it, and everyone's happy. So this is ampersand. He's playing in the sand. Yeah. See what they did there. And a little bit about the story and design principles behind it. So this company, Yet, they were using Backbone a lot, and they loved it. They loved how minimal it was. It was very unopinionated. But they're also, on the back end, they were using Node. And they loved the concept of these tiny NPM modules that they could use however they want. Mix and match your NPM modules. And what he says in that keynote, and this is at Backbone Conf that he said this, he said, I think Backbone is too monolithic, which is crazy when you compare it to other things like Ember or Angular. He said, Backbone's too monolithic even. We want things to be really separate. And so they started it started as extending Backbone, but then they just decided to go all in and create this new system of modules that separate this functionality into discrete pieces. So, by the way, there is no Ampersand.js. There's no library, Ampersand.js, you can just bring in to your app and use. Doesn't exist. There is you'll see an NPM module called Ampersand, which is a CLI command that can help you, but really there is none. This basically is Ampersand.js. Search for it on NPM, and you'll see quite a bit. Some of these up at the top aren't even official ones, but you see that's Ampersand, that's the CLI tool. Ampersand Collection _mixin. You see all these things. That's Ampersand. So here's your one-liner for the day. NPM is the framework. And I don't know if that's, I just wanted it to sound catchy, basically. I don't know if it's completely accurate, but I think it sounds cool. And that's basically the concept. NPM is the framework. Use modules from NPM. And by the way, they totally support and love the idea of front-end code on NPM, which is an ongoing discussion, I think, but that's the way it works here. Ampersand modules are written in CommonJS style. Are any of you familiar with CommonJS and how that works? Basically, it looks like that. You require stuff, the other modules that you need, and then you export them. This is how they're written. This is how you have to use them, which means to use them in the browser, you need a tool like Browserify or Webpack. I'm a fan of Webpack. And the nice thing about that is with Backbone, say, you had to bring in some other dependencies, add some script tags like underscore jQuery. In this case, the NPM and Browserify or Webpack will take care of the dependencies for you. So that's kind of cool. The way most of these work is you bring in the module and then you call extend on them to add your own specific functionality. So you have like a model, you call model.extend and pass in your own stuff. With properties and methods, you make your own subclass, so to speak. And this extend does stuff for you. It sets up the prototype chain. And you can call extend as many times as you like. You can pull in things from lots of places. And I think this is really where the power comes in. So when you're calling extend, what you're really doing is you're passing in a mix in. And I think extend maybe isn't the best way to think about it, because it's not just a linear chain of inheritance in like classical object-oriented stuff. You can mix in stuff. So the power comes in when someone can come up with a mix-in that extends the functionality of, say, a collection and publishes that to NPM. You can bring in that mix-in, just add it to your collection, and you're good to go. And you can bring in all sorts of different mix-ins that do sorts of different things. So it makes it really easy to extend the functionality of these modules and share them with each other. And like I said before, because of the way this works, we don't have this single framework that you have to update or keep up to date with. You just publish a new module to NPM if there is one, or you bring one in. You need specific functionality. You just bring that module in, and you're good to go. I think that's really cool. So I think this approach, the key to using it successfully is really you got to think about what problem am I trying to solve? Instead of kind of going the way of let's pick a framework and then we'll make the application work with it, really think about what your application needs and find the right tools for it. And of course, you're not going to know ahead of time all the needs that you have, and you're not going to know perfectly what's the right fit. But I think this is a good approach to go about it. So that's kind of the way I'm going to take this when I introduce some of the main modules that Ampersand provides. What problems are we trying to solve? So let's say we need to track application state. I know state is kind of becoming a swear word if you're into functional programming. But we have state that we need to track in the application. This could be stuff like data from the server, like a contact with certain data on it. Or it could be something that's just in the application, like maybe search terms that maybe in other approaches, let's say if you're just using jQuery, you might have a thing where you have the data, you render it to the DOM, and then basically the data is the DOM, and you don't have a way of really abstracting it from that in case you need to use it in multiple places. So what you have to help you with that are two modules called Ampersand State and Ampersand Collection. Now again, sorry, could I get a show of hands? Has anyone used Backbone? Let me see that again. Just not okay. So not a whole lot. What kind of tools or frameworks are you guys familiar with, if any? Shout them out. Angular. Okay. This is going to be quite a bit different from Angular, but give it 5 minutes. Okay. So Ampersand State is roughly comparable to Backbone model. It's just a way of modeling your data. There's a major difference, but I'll get to that in a minute. The main thing that you do with Ampersand State is you pass it. You define some properties that your state is going to have. So in this example, I have an ID. It's a type of string, and you can pass it a default. So when you instantiate this model, it automatically gets provided this default. So I'm using the UUID module, requiring it up here. And when I create a model, it'll automatically create a UUID for that model. Name, description, created. There are different types. You can have numbers, dates, Booleans, stuff like that. Let's see. Session properties work the same way, except that their intent is just to be used for that particular session. When you call on a model, you can call model to JSON. These properties will not be included. So if you're going to be sending data to a server, that isn't going to get passed along with it. It also has a concept of derived properties, where you can have properties that are calculated based on other properties. So here, this is from a silly app that I made, but this property depends on another one called most recently happened, which is a date. So when you define it as a dependency in the depths thing, it's basically saying, okay, when this changes, recalculate this function. And then the function is how it's calculated. And then you can listen to those changes. So let me go to a simple example. Have any of you ever used require bin? This is really cool. It's sort of like JS Fiddle or JS Bin or kind of those things where you can run JavaScript in the browser. But the cool thing is you can actually use common JS modules in it from NPM. So you just type require there, and it automatically pulls it in for you, and you can run the code. So it makes it really good for this, because that's the only way you can do it. So I have a simple state here. I'm attaching it to the window, so it's easy to just access from the console. And we have just a first name and a last name. So if I run it, I can create a new model. Oops. Fingers. All right. So now we just have this model. So it's an object with lots of stuff on it. But if we call, can you guys see that okay? By the way, yeah. There's two JSON. It only includes those properties, and then that can be used to, say, pass to a server. Do you want me to? Okay. So yeah. Now I have this little helper function here that attaches an event listener. So most of these modules, they have events built into them, so you can listen to changes on properties and other things. So let me pass this model into, or this state into log change and listen for changes on last name. Okay. So now. You see it logged this change. Last name changed to Frenchman. And you get the reference, by the way? It kind of dates me. It's from Homestar Runner. Sid Hoffman or Sid Frenchman? Look it up. OK, so kind of cool. We can, yeah, go ahead.
So I noticed that you're not using any kind of a setter there. Under the hood, is this using ECMAScript 5 getters and setters to accomplish that?
Yeah, it's using, so that's why it's important to define your properties first, because it goes through those when you're instantiating, and it uses object-defined property. And so, and Backbone had this. This is why Backbone, you were encouraged to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So set last name. And it's the same thing. Basically, it's doing that under the hood. Yeah, which is kind of cool. You can actually like interact with it like a regular.
That doesn't support ES5, you can still do it using set, but if
yeah.
you really want to get the convenience out of it, target things that support ES5.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up. I actually should have mentioned that they outright say that we support IE9 and above, and the evergreen browsers. We're not going to, yeah. So you got to support ECMAScript 5 to really get the most out of this. Yeah. So let's say we want to be able to calculate the full name on the fly. So we have a derived property, and it depends on first name and last name. Let's see. Okay. Sometimes it thinks there are problems when there really aren't. Oh, thanks. Sometimes I have problems when there aren't. Okay. All right, so now we have that. So we need to, since we started over, I need to make sure I'm in the right. All right, so we create a new person. And now we can see person.fullname is available to us. And we can also attach event listeners to the derived properties as well. So and then, so if I just change the last name here, it changes the last name, then it recalculates the derived property, and it listens for a change on that and logs that. So you can listen to those changes. So knowing that, and there are other features here too, but start thinking about like what can you do with this? You have this object now that's observable, and if it represents data that's used in the application, now you can start thinking about ways you can use that. If you need to represent this data in multiple places, they can all listen for changes. So if you have like some kind of view that modifies the data, the view is no longer responsible for going out and finding all the places that the data is represented. It's now reversed, where all these views are just paying attention to this data, and it tells them when it's changed. Kind of cool. Any more questions about that? This is like the backbone of Ampersand, I'd say, Ampersand state. If you see applications that are using different combinations of stuff, they're almost always going to be using this with other views. Yeah. Did you have a question? Sorry. I thought I saw you raise your hand. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. All right. You can also have child models and collections, which is something that Backbone was missing, which I really liked. All of these modules have an initialize function that you can define, which is basically stuff that happens when it's instantiated. So you can attach event listeners there, do all sorts of things that you need to do. And you can also add your own custom functions. That's totally cool. And show how to use it. So Ampersand Collection it's just that. It's a collection of objects. Typically, you use Ampersand state with it. So here we have an Ampersand collection that you define what model it's expecting, which model can be a state. That's sort of for backwards compatibility with Backbone. The main index is the way that you find models in the collection. So when you can do a collection.get and pass in whatever the main index is. So the main index will be the ID property by default. So if the models have an ID property, you can find stuff that way. You can also pass in other indexes to search by. A comparator is you can pass in a property or function, just a way of calculating how to sort the collection. So it's sortable. You can do stuff like that. And so using Ampersand Collection, you have these events that it fires when a model is added, when it's removed, or when it's resorted, when it's reset. There's all sorts of things that you can listen for. So so here we have a person. It has an ID, which is a number, and we have a collection of people, which has these event listeners for adding and removing. So the way, let's create a new collection. And we'll pass in one model first. Yeah. All right, and the nice thing about it is the collection kind of works like an array. It has a lot of stuff that you'd expect, and so like we have a length property that gives you the length of the number of models in the models array. And also it proxies a lot of these ECMAScript 5 array functions like map, filter, reduce. That you can call directly on the collection, and it'll actually be working on the internal models array, which is kind of nice. So So I mean, it filters it. I mean, it returns the one that's in there. So now we have this collection. Let's add another model to it. Normally, you wouldn't be adding IDs manually. That'd either be happening on the server, or you could do like I showed you before with the defaults. But oops. Thanks. I thought I was writing a function for a second. So you see it fired this event. Model was added. So again, think about how you can use this in your application. So this is all great and good, but yes, question?
Forgive me, I'm coming late, but is this primarily focused on Ampersand and sort of the individual building blocks that it provides, or are you also going to just talk about sort of how to pull in various small JavaScript libraries of your choice? Or?
We don't, not really talking about how to do that per se. I mean, we talked a little bit about the beginning, using NPM, using NPM to bring in the modules that you need.
Yeah.
Right now we're going over the kind of stuff that Ampersand offers. Yeah?
On your previous example, you were observing kind of the length by using add, non, remove. I'm wondering, on collections, can you observe their properties the same way that you can observe properties on models? Could I have done an observe on the length property, for example, and get whenever it is add or remove?
Yeah, so can you observe the length property? That's a question that's been going around for a long time, actually. Currently, unfortunately, no. There's been talk of like actually making the collection extend from state so the length is actually a property that you can observe, but right now it doesn't really work that way. So you'd have to kind of set up things that listen to that.
Listen for add and remove explicitly.
Yeah, basically. But I mean, that's an ongoing discussion on GitHub and stuff, so that could change. But right now, that's not how it works. So these things are basically just for tracking state that we talked about, but we also have Ampersand Model and Ampersand REST Collection, which are basically the same thing, except they extend it with capabilities of working with the REST endpoint, typically. So we have a model, we have a collection, and usually in the collection you'll define a REST. It's meant to work with typical REST resources out of the box. So you give it an endpoint, and then it automatically calls these post, get, put, delete things. So it gives you a few more functions that you have, like fetch does a get thing, save puts a post. So it just takes care of all those AJAX requests for you. And these things will fire a sync event that you can listen for when something is synced. But they'll also, if you're updating data, you can also listen for those changes too. Something else I was going to say, but it escaped me. So, all right. So I need to display data and handle user interactions. That's what apps are all about, right? So Ampersand provides something called Ampersand View. And this is probably the part where interchangeability really comes into play. Ampersand View does a lot of cool things, but maybe it's not your cup of tea, and you'd prefer to use something else, and that's fine. That's typically what you see when people combine stuff, is using Ampersand state and collections with some other kind of view layer. But View is perfectly capable, and you can use it and see how it works for you. So let's go to this wiki. So we have a person, we have that kind of stuff. So here's a view. You give it a template, and a template can be a number of different things. You can pass it a string, but there are lots of different ways to come up with that string. You can load in a JADE file. You can use handlebars, whatever. You can pass it a function. And bindings are one-way bindings. You can have it listen for properties and update that particular piece of the view based on the changes on that property. And there's an events hash, which you can define user events and how to handle them within the application. So here it just says click and alert full name click without any kind of selector means that it's just when I click on this whole view. But you can also say click some kind of selector, and then it'll just be listening for change for events on that particular piece of the view. All right, so let's create a person, and then so we can pass in a model that'll get attached to the view. Okay, so now we have a person view. And what we want to do is call the render thing on it, the render function, and it'll create the DOM node for it, and then you can attach it as you need to. So we're going to attach it to the document. Document body. What? Oh, Penchild?
7?
Thanks. All right. So you call the render function and then access the L property, which is the actual DOM node, and it renders. Now, because I have this binding here, it's going to listen for changes on that property and update the DOM as necessary. So now I have person. I can say first name is Janet. I don't know why that came to mind. It updates. And also know we have so we have the click event. So if I click on here, it gives me that alert. I'm Janet Hoffman. So you notice that's using the derived property. Little note about this data hook thing. This is sort of a convention that they decided on. Instead of using classes or IDs, they encourage you to use this data hook property. There was a lot of discussion that went around deciding what that was going to be called, but they offer some shortcuts for accessing those inside the view. So you see you got this hook here. That's just a shortcut for a data hook selector.
So it just so happens that our hook on the page is the same as our property in the model?
Yeah. Yeah, I just call it that for convenience. Yeah.
So how do we go about making that a more complex output? Instead of just being first name, say, whenever first name changes, I want to put in some more computer value.
So first of all, these bindings, it's actually a separate module called Ampersand DOM bindings, but it's automatically included in View. It has a lot of other kinds of bindings you can do. This one's just text, but you can also do like HTML content or value for form inputs. You can toggle things based on a truthy or falsy value, toggle whether it's rendered or visible, toggle a class, attributes, all sorts of things like that. And incidentally, the person or the view actually extends from ampersand state. So it has its own properties. So if you have properties that really only make sense to that view, they're very presentational, you can add them to the property instead of adding them to the actual data model itself. So L, like the EL, is actually a property on the view. And Backbone typically will give you a $L also, which is a jQuery object that accesses the view. This doesn't come with that by default, but someone created a mix-in that's really super simple. It creates a derived property called $L that updates based on whether that depends on the L property, which I think is kind of elegant. Does that answer your question at all, or? Yeah. Now, they also have something called Collectionview, which makes it really easy to render collections of things, and subviews. So, take a look at here. So, we have this parent view with this template, and it has a subview, which is a collection view. So it says, okay, the container is this data hook members list. it depends on this collection which we pass in here, this Beatles collection, and it renders it using this item view. And so now we have this collection view that's also watching the collection for changes, and it'll update as necessary. So that's already running, I guess. So if we were to change the comparator to instrument, it changes how it's sorted. Now, and then let's see. If we happen to add notice how it inserted in there, because we're sorting by instrument, so it inserted it in the right place and rendered it that way. And then we can, since he was only in the Beatles for a short time, we can probably remove him safely. So we need to pass in the model, so we'll do Beatles get, and we'll pass in the ID, removes it, and the collection view is updated accordingly. Any questions about that? Yeah?
If you change the comparator, does it observe that and resort the list on the fly to do that? Is there a way of doing that? Or how would you go about resorting this now?
Yeah, it was actually initially sorted by ID, right?
Yeah. Let me refresh my memory here. Okay, I think you'll have to do that and then call. There you go.
At this point, it's going to continue to re-render if things happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's actually, it's sorting the collection itself, not the data. Yeah. So you have to call sort. The sort method is automatically called when something is added or removed. It'll recalculate that for you. But sometimes you'll have to call it manually depending on what you're doing. All right, a little bit of time left. Okay, so no, all of you are wondering. I really need React. Turns out they're actually big fans of React on the team. So they provide something called, do any of you use React? Oh, cool. I'm just barely learning about it, so React is supposedly really cool. But they provide a mix-in that you can provide to your React components that automatically listen for changes. There's also something called the virtual DOM mix-in. If you want to get sort of the benefits of React, but still use Ampersand View, you can pass in virtual DOM mix-in, which means it renders stuff to the virtual DOM and does a comparison. You could talk for a whole hour about this, so I won't go into too much detail. But basically, it lets you can re-render with reckless abandon and not have to worry too much about performance because it's only actually changing the real DOM when it is absolutely necessary. Okay, so to do MVC, I was going to show, but it's not too interesting. But you can look on todomvc.com, has an ampersand example, and you can see how that's used. I think they're talking about doing an ampersand React example as well. So the main point I want to get across is, first off, write your application so that it can be extensible, interchangeable. You can't predict everything, but don't try to predict too much. Write in a way that you might be able to swap out things as you need to. Start by thinking about what your application needs. What kind of functionality do you need? And then go look for the tools to find them. And then, of course, there are times where we just want to try a new framework or something, and that's cool. But for buzzword mission-critical apps, it might be more appropriate to really think about what kind of things you need and only bring in the tools that you absolutely need for that. Finally, ask your doctor if Ampersand is right for you. This is just barely scratching the surface of what it's about. But remember, you don't have to go all or nothing with Ampersand. It's just some tools to help you get your job done and not lock you in. So maybe some of these pieces will be helpful for you. Maybe all of them will. You can certainly build an entire application with Ampersand using it like a total framework. I've done that. But maybe you just want to use a state, or maybe just the router. There is a router, by the way. Or maybe just views or something like that. That's fine, and that's what we're kind of going for here. And here's some resources. There's documentation. They have a Gitter chat room. You can sign into Gitter with your GitHub account. There's a book and a video series called Human JavaScript that it talks about Ampersand, but also it's more philosophical about how we need to write code for humans. We don't want to make this an unpleasant experience for developers as well. And there's some Twitter accounts there. So are there any other questions about this or other things? Yeah.
When you go to write your application and then split up into different node modules,
Mm-hmm.
is that better or worse for breaking changes compared to a framework? Like if a framework comes out with a new version,
Mm-hmm.
kind of look at what the changes are and decide if I want to move or not.
Yeah.
Do you find that using Ampersand and all the node modules, does that help or hinder you with upgrade paths?
I think it helps with upgrade paths because now you're only looking at upgrading a specific module. You have your, because you're using NPM, you're using package.json, you're defining versions for each specific module that you're using. So you can go through one at a time and say, okay, let's try upgrading this, see what the breaking changes are, and see what happens. We don't have to worry about the other parts. But on that note, one thing about their philosophy is they strictly follow semantic versioning, SEMver, if any of you are familiar with that. So a major version number change is going to have breaking changes, and they'll alert you to that. And so there's sort of some safeguards in place to make sure you don't accidentally encounter breaking changes, which is nice. I don't know if did any of you follow? Any of you used underscore, the underscore library? Do you remember what happened last year with the version bump? It was interesting. So it went from 1.6 to 1.7, and there were several breaking changes. People were kind of upset about this because it sounded like a minor version bump. The creator of underscore and Backbone, Jeremy Ashkenazi, I apologize, I don't know how to pronounce it. Turns out he's actually pretty adamantly against semantic versioning as a concept. Yeah. He wrote a whole long essay about it, and I can't exactly remember. He thinks because we put too much trust in it maybe, and it doesn't solve all our problems.
But it's funny that it has become such a de facto standard.
I know, especially in the node world.
Surprised by his breaking changes because they thought, they've already come to assume that we live in a world that's semantically versioned, right?
Exactly, especially in Node, NPM and stuff. That's critical, and so as a result, Ampersand uses Lodash now instead of underscore, which Lodash does respect semantic versioning, so that's good.
It's faster too, right?
Yeah, it's better in a lot of ways because you can bring in just individual functions as you need to, and the versioning, and it's really focused on performance. It has a lot of advantages. Yeah. Luca, you have another question?
So these modules are written to be good with NPM.
Mhm.
They're written with module export syntax. What methodology do they use to package them for the browser? Do they use Browserify, or what do you use to make those work without module exports?
So they don't package them. They're just raw CommonJS modules. You're responsible for packaging them the way you need to. So, and they have sort of examples of using Browserify or Webpack, but it's really up to the developer to, yeah.
Are there some common gulp or grunt tasks that help out with that for you, or is it just kind of roll your own at this point?
For Browserify and Webpack and stuff?
Anything
Yeah.
that would package those up for you.
Yeah.
Are there established patterns for taking your set of Ampersand modules that you choose to use and packaging those up for the web?
Yeah. I mean, basically in any other circumstance when you use Browserify, it just works exactly the same way. So There's like a Grunt, Gulp, Browserify. There's Webpack as well. There's nothing special about Ampersand how they do it. You just need to do Browserify, or does that kind of yeah?
Fine.
I mean it's.
You mentioned Browserify and Webpack. Is one more common than the other in this space?
I think they're kind of. I don't know. I think Webpack is a really rising star. Browserify is a lot simpler to use. It's a lot easier to get started. Webpack requires more configuration. And Browserify was a little earlier, and it's really popular. But Webpack has a lot more capability, so it's becoming more popular with some developers. And in fact, well, that's fun. Henrik Joroteg actually wrote a module that's sort of a wrapper on top of Webpack to make the configuration a lot easier. I recommend Webpack, but there is a little bit of a learning curve with it because it has. I don't know if any of you have the same experience, but the thing is, like Webpack can also just run. You don't have to run it within Gulp or Grunt. It can do all the building for you. It even handles style sheets and stuff like that. So it's worth looking into. Yeah? Any other questions? Once again, if you're interested in learning more about Infusionsoft, come talk to me or Brent afterwards. We'd love to talk to you. And yeah, thank you for coming.